Sometimes the most dangerous stories don't begin with a scream. They begin with a quiet choice, one that no one sees, except the person who decides to be kind when it would be easier to be cruel. This is the story of a monster who spent centuries pretending he had no heart, until the night a dying girl proved him wrong. Rain slid in silver lines down the broken stained-glass windows of the abandoned cathedral, each drop tapping against stone like a nervous heartbeat. High above the city, in the shadows between rotting beams and forgotten altars, the vampire king stood alone. His name had been whispered for generations with fear and trembling, but to himself, he was only a tired echo of a man who had lived too long. His white hair fell over his shoulders like moonlight on snow, his dark cloak folding around him like the night itself, and in his crimson eyes there was something almost no one ever noticed: exhaustion and a grief so old it no longer knew how to speak. He told himself he watched the city only to keep his kingdom in control, that he listened to every heartbeat below because he was a predator. But the truth was softer and far more dangerous to his pride. He watched because he remembered being human. He remembered what it was to be fragile, to be cold and hungry and terrified. He remembered holding a dying friend once, centuries ago, and swearing that he would never again care enough to feel that kind of pain. Yet every night he came back to this same ruined cathedral, standing where the wind pushed in through cracked stone, watching the lights of the human world flicker like stars that had fallen into streets. That was when he felt it, a heartbeat that didn't beat quite right. At first, it was just another rhythm in the symphony of life below: footsteps on cobblestone, laughter in a distant tavern, a mother's lullaby in a cramped apartment. But underneath all of that, like a single string pulled too tight, there was a pulse that stumbled, caught, and then raced with desperate fear. His head turned sharply toward it before he could stop himself. Somewhere in the alleys, someone was running, exhausted, close to collapsing. He closed his eyes, tracing the sound. The heartbeat was young, fragile and fading. He whispered to himself that it was none of his concern. He had made rules for a reason. The fewer lives he touched, the fewer regrets he carried. But that failing heartbeat trembled in the air like a candle about to go out, and something hidden deep in his chest, the part that refused to die with his mortal body, twisted painfully. With a sigh that sounded almost like annoyance and almost like surrender, he stepped off the edge of the cathedral. The wind rushed past him, carrying the cold scent of rain, old stone, and wet leaves. In a blur of shadow and red eyes, he cut through the dark, landing silently on the rooftop of a narrow house, then another, following the broken rhythm of that one fragile heart. Below him, a girl staggered through the rain-soaked alleyway, clutching her side. Her dress was torn, her hair plastered to her face, and her breathing was shallow and panicked. She moved as if the world around her had turned into a tunnel, sounds fading at the edges. He could smell blood, hers, but only faintly, not enough to tempt him in the way blood usually did. Instead, it was the scent of fear that wrapped around his senses, sharp and bitter. She was muttering to herself in a shaking voice, half prayer, half promise. "Just a little farther. Don't stop. Not yet." Her feet slipped in the mud, knees hitting stone, palms scraping against the ground. She stayed down for a moment, shoulders trembling, then forced herself up again with stubborn determination that pulled at something in him he had tried to bury. He landed soundlessly at the mouth of the alley, a dark shape framed by the dim, flickering light of an old street lamp. She didn't see him at first. She only saw the wall in front of her, the dead end she had been running blindly toward. When she realized there was nowhere left to go, she turned, and that was when her eyes met his. They were not the eyes of a fearless warrior or a legendary chosen one. They were simply the eyes of a human girl who had fought past her limits and finally had nothing left. Yet even through the fear and the exhaustion, there was something strangely clear in them, like the last patch of blue sky before a storm closes in. She still cared whether she lived. She still had someone or something to live for. He felt it then, like a memory pressing against his ribs, the echo of his own past, of the boy he had once been, standing alone against something larger than himself and refusing to fall. The Vampire King's posture, always so cold and regal, softened by a fraction. He stepped forward, and the wet stone beneath his boots didn't make a sound. "Stay away," she whispered, though her voice shook too much to sound truly threatening. Her fingers curled into fists as if she could fight him with empty hands and sheer will. I don't have anything left to take." Her words cut more deeply than she could have known. For a moment, he almost turned away, choosing the comfort of distance over the risk of caring. Yet something about her struck him as unbearably wrong to abandon. She was alone, soaked through, half collapsed, and still she faced him like a final guardian of her own life. He let his voice fall gentle, smoother than the rain. "If I wanted to take something from you," he said quietly, "you would already be on the ground." She flinched at the sound of his tone, not because it was cruel, but because it was. It was calm. It was almost kind. That confusion softened the sharp line of fear on her face. He could sense the way her heart fluttered painfully in her chest, skipping beats like a bird's wing caught on a wire. Why are you here?" she breathed, swaying on her feet. He studied her carefully. Mud streaked her calves. One of her shoes was gone, the other barely holding together. Her lips were pale, and her breath kept catching as if invisible hands were pressing against her lungs. Whatever had happened to her, it hadn't only been tonight. This was exhaustion built over days, maybe weeks, of running from something she could not outrun. "Because your heart is failing," he answered honestly. "And I am very tired of watching people die when I could have done something." The admission tasted strange, unfamiliar, like a language he hadn't spoken in 100 years. For a long moment, they only looked at each other. The rain softened, turning into a fine mist that made the air glow under the lamp. In that fragile, suspended space, the city around them seemed far away. Just a vampire king and a girl who had almost fallen into the dark without anyone noticing. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising even himself. She swallowed hard, as if the question itself was a lifeline she hadn't expected. "Elena," she whispered. "My name is Elena." "Elena," he repeated, like a promise. Something in his chest pulsed once, a slow, reluctant beat, as if the emptiness there remembered what it felt like to hold a name gently. He stepped closer, close enough to see the faint tremor in her lips, the way her hands shook as she tried to stay brave. "You are dying," he said, not unkindly. "Not tonight, perhaps, but soon. Your heart can't carry what you've been forcing it to carry." Her eyes glistened with sudden anger, not at him, but at the truth. "I don't have a choice," she said, voice breaking. "I promised someone I would make it. I can't stop. I can't just lie down and wait." The raw honesty in her words cut straight through the centuries he had used as armor. He felt a surge of respect, so sharp it almost hurt. This fragile creature, soaked and shivering, held more courage in her than some warriors he had seen fall apart at the first sign of fear. "You are not weak for needing help," he replied softly. "Only foolish for refusing it." "Help," her laugh came out rough and startled. "From you, you don't even know me." That was true. He didn't know her favorite season or the name of the person she had promised to reach. He didn't know what had driven her into these alleys or what memories made her hold herself together even as her body betrayed her. But he knew enough. He knew that she was someone who refused to give up, and he knew that the world had not been kind to her, yet she had not turned cruel because of it. "You are alive," he said simply. "That is enough." For the first time, she really looked at him. The silver hair, the impossibly still eyes, the way shadows clung to his shoulders as if reluctant to leave their master. Fear flickered through her once more, but beneath it, another emotion stirred. Curiosity. Because despite everything she had heard in whispered rumors, despite the chill that rolled off him like fog from a graveyard, there was something undeniably gentle in the way he watched her. The silence between them stretched, fragile as glass. Then her knees buckled. He moved faster than her body could fall, arms catching her before her head struck the stone. Her weight was light, too light, and her breath hitched against his chest. Up close, he could feel it clearly now, the chaotic stutter of her heart, the way it seemed to fight itself with every beat. She was slipping, not because of a wound he could see, but because some invisible thread inside her had frayed almost beyond repair. "Let me go," she gasped weakly, pride trying to pull her away even as her strength failed. I can still walk." He held her a little tighter, not rough, but unshakable. "You have walked far enough," he murmured. "If you keep going like this, you will not reach whatever you are trying so hard to reach." "I have to," she whispered, eyes glossy with frustrated tears. "He's waiting, I promised." Her voice faded, lost somewhere between consciousness and sleep. In that moment, with her head resting against his shoulder and her heartbeat stumbling helplessly, the vampire king realized he was standing at a crossroads he had avoided for centuries. He knew an old, forbidden ritual, one that could bind a failing heart to the strength of his own immortal essence, save a life at a price he had never been willing to pay. It was a secret he had buried with his past, a mercy so powerful it was also a curse. He had sworn never to use it. But Alina's fingers, small and cold, clutched weakly at his cloak as if she were reaching for the last solid thing in a collapsing world. And for the first time in a very long time, the king felt something dangerously close to fear, not for himself, but for a life he had known for only a handful of heartbeats. He closed his eyes as the rain finally stopped, leaving the alley washed and still. Within his chest, an ancient power stirred like a sleeping storm, answering a call he hadn't spoken yet. If he used the ritual, he could save her. She would live, her heart beating strong again. But the cost? The cost would be a part of his immortal soul. Elena's breath grew shallower, her grip on his cloak loosening. He looked down at her pale face, at the stubborn crease still faintly visible between her brows, even in near unconsciousness, as if she refused to surrender even in her sleep. Kindness. Courage. A promise she had not yet fulfilled. His decision trembled on the edge of the unspoken. In the silence of that forgotten alley, with a human girl's life flickering in his arms and an ancient curse rising in his veins, the vampire king drew in a slow, steady breath and began to whisper the first forbidden word of the ritual. Only to feel, in that exact same instant, a strange, blinding warmth spark in the center of his own chest, as if some unseen force had decided faster than he did and reached out from her heart toward his. And before he could understand what was happening, before he could either stop or complete the ritual, a single, terrifying thought slammed into his mind. What if saving her doesn't just cost me power? What if, without meaning to, she takes something from me that I have guarded for centuries, something I never intended to give? The storm inside him roared awake. The alley seemed to tighten around them, and as an invisible red light began to gather between their hearts, he realized with a shock that the choice might no longer be his to make. Sometimes, when people talk about fate, they imagine some grand design written in the stars. But what happened between the vampire king and Alina did not feel like destiny. It felt like a mistake, one impossible, irreversible mistake that neither of them fully understood. The moment that strange warmth flared between their chests, the alley changed. The air thickened, humming with a low vibration that only he could hear, like 1,000 whispered prayers being spoken all at once. A faint, crimson glow began to bloom where his heart should have been still and empty, then reached out in a thin, trembling thread toward the girl in his arms. He froze. This was not how the ritual was supposed to begin. He knew every step of the ancient spell hidden deep in his memory. The words, the intent, the controlled release of energy. But he had not finished the first syllable when Alina's heart answered him on its own. It was like watching two magnets snap together the moment they were close enough, a force older than language pulling them into a bond neither had chosen intentionally. Her back arched slightly, a soft gasp slipping from her lips even though she was barely conscious. The faint red light that had sparked in his chest shot out in a jagged line, connecting them, pulsing with a rhythm that didn't belong to him alone anymore. It was as if her failing heart had reached up in pure instinct, wrapping itself around the first source of strength it could find. "No," he whispered, more to the magic than to her. "Not like this." He tried to pull back, to close himself off, but it was too late. The bond had formed, a living thread of energy glowing brighter with each frantic beat of her heart. He could feel it now, feel her inside that connection. Her fear, yes, but also her stubborn will to live, her desperate love for someone far away. The quiet, solid core of goodness that refused to turn cruel even when the world had offered her every excuse. The Vampire King had never felt so exposed. Elena's eyes fluttered open halfway, unfocused at first. Then her gaze found his face, and something in her expression changed. The raw panic in her softened into something almost peaceful, like a person stepping into warm sunlight after a long winter. "What is that?" she breathed, her voice no more than a fragile thread of sound. Her hand hovered, trembling, over the space between them where the thin red line glowed faintly. She didn't fully understand what was happening. Somehow, that made it worse. He could have lied. He could have told her it was nothing, that she was only imagining it, that this was all temporary. But after so many years of hiding behind half-truths and shadows, he found he couldn't bring himself to lie to the one person whose heartbeat had made him break his oldest rule. "It's a bond," he admitted quietly. "A very old one. You are taking strength from me." Her brows knit in confusion. "I didn't mean—" She choked on the rest of the sentence as another wave of energy rolled through the connection. He felt it like a tug deep in his chest, a sensation halfway between pain and relief. Her failing heart seized that power hungrily, wrapping around it like a drowning person clinging to a rope. The change was almost immediate. Her pulse, which had been stumbling and chaotic, began to steady. The blue tinge at the edges of her lips faded. Color returned like a slow sunrise to her cheeks. Each breath she took became slightly less shallow, as if invisible weights were being lifted from her lungs one by one. The Vampire King watched, torn between awe and dread. This was what he had wanted, to save a life instead of simply watching it fade. Yet the ritual, twisted by her unconscious desperation, had turned into something far more dangerous. This wasn't the controlled transfer he knew. This was raw, instinctive, and uncontrolled. The bond wasn't just giving, it was sharing. He could feel his own power streaming out of him in gentle waves, drawn not by his command, but by her need. "How long?" she asked softly, still half-dazed, eyes tracing the thin red glow between them. "How long will it do this?" He hesitated, weighing the truth against the comfort of ignorance. "As long as your heart needs it," he replied, "or until the bond breaks." "Can you break it?" There was no accusation in her tone, only a strange, quiet curiosity. She didn't yet understand the full danger. She only knew that, for the first time in too long, breathing didn't hurt as much. He opened his mouth to say yes. That of course he could. He was the Vampire King, master of shadows and centuries of forbidden magic. But when he tried to imagine severing that living thread between them, something inside him recoiled. He felt the warmth of her heartbeat through it now, bright and stubborn, and the thought of ripping it away made his chest ache in a way no physical wound ever had. "Not without hurting you," he said finally. Her gaze sharpened. "Then don't." There was an unexpected strength in those two words, a quiet command from someone who had spent too long having no control at all. She pushed herself up a little, still cradled in his arms, testing the return of her strength with cautious disbelief. Her hand brushed his chest by accident, right where the red glow pulsed faintly beneath his ribs. He stiffened at the contact. No one touched him there. It was the one place he still treated like it could break, even though his heart no longer beat. I can feel it, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Like warmth, like someone lit a small fire where it was always cold. Your body is responding to the bond, he explained, forcing his voice to stay calm. It is taking what it needs to repair what was broken. And you, she asked, looking up at him with a kind of searching honesty that made it impossible to retreat behind his usual mask. What does it do to you? He almost said nothing, almost brushed the question aside with some careless remark. But the truth was already there, clear and quiet inside him. He felt again. Not just in the shallow way he had grown used to annoyance, boredom, a distant melancholy, but deeply. The bond was not only sending power from him to her, it was sending sensations back. Your emotions bleed through, he admitted softly. Your fear, your hope, your stubbornness. The corner of his mouth twitched, just for a heartbeat, in something that almost resembled a smile. You are loud, Alina, even in silence. She blinked, then actually laughed, a small, shaky sound, but real. I've been told that before, she said, just not in that way. He felt the echo of that small burst of humor travel through the bond, warm and bright. It brushed against places inside him he had nearly forgotten. Places that remembered what it was to find another human being funny, to share a moment that wasn't built on fear or power. And then, as quickly as the lightness came, a shadow crossed her face. Her gaze darted past him toward the mouth of the alley, where the world continued as if nothing extraordinary were happening. Her fingers tightened slightly on his cloak, as if suddenly remembering the reason she had been running. I have to go, she said, trying to sit up more fully. I feel better, stronger. I can't waste this. He did not release her. You can barely stand, he replied. Where are you trying so desperately to go? She hesitated, torn between caution and the raw need to be believed by someone, anyone. Something about his stillness, his unwavering attention, pushed her toward honesty. Very few people had ever listened to her without looking away. My brother, she said at last. He's sick. His heart is worse than mine. The doctors stopped trying. They said there's nothing left to do but make him comfortable, but he's only 16. Her throat tightened, but she pushed through the emotion. I was trying to reach the old healer in the northern quarter. People say he knows strange things, illegal things, like you. Her eyes flicked back to the glowing thread between them. I thought maybe he'd help me bargain for more time. The vampire king felt the truth of her words move through the bond like a soft, painful ache. Love, fear, helplessness. This was what had driven her past the limits of her body, what had torn her heart so thin it nearly collapsed. You ran yourself to the edge of death, he murmured, for a chance to save someone else from it. I always promised him I'd protect him, she answered simply. He's all I have left. Silence again. Rainwater dripped from a cracked gutter above, each drop marking the seconds between one choice and the next. The king studied her face, the determination settled there like stone beneath softness. Without meaning to, without wanting to, he felt a quiet admiration take root. Centuries had shown him countless forms of courage, but this quiet, relentless love impressed him more than any battlefield. You came looking for forbidden magic, he said slowly, and instead, you bound yourself to the most dangerous creature in this city. Are you going to hurt me? She asked, not as a challenge, but as a calm, practical question. She needed to know the cost. His answer came easier than he expected. No. The word surprised even him with its certainty. I have hurt too many, he added softly. I will not add your name to that list. The tension in her shoulders eased, just a little. She let herself lean back against him, not in surrender, but in a kind of exhausted trust she couldn't afford to give lightly. The bond thrummed gently between them, like a shared heartbeat that didn't quite belong to either one alone. Then maybe, she said, eyes closing for a moment, this mistake wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. Her acceptance struck him harder than any blade. She called this a mistake, and she was right, but she also chose to believe it might carry something good with it. Hope. That fragile, reckless thing he had tried to bury a long time ago flickered at the edge of his awareness. Far in the distance, a church bell rang the late hour. Time was slipping away. Elena stirred at the sound, a reminder slicing through her brief moment of safety. "I have to get back to him," she repeated, urgency sharpening her voice. "If my heart is stronger now, I can make it. I don't know how long this will last." His jaw tightened. Every instinct told him that letting her go alone would be foolish. She was stronger, yes, but not healed. The bond was still new, unstable. And whoever had pushed her to the point of running through dangerous alleys at night might not be far behind. He had seen enough of this city's cruelty to know that. Yet another part of him, a very old, very proud part, resisted the idea of stepping any deeper into a human life. To walk beside her, to enter her world, would mean entanglement, responsibility, connection. "Your brother," he said quietly. "Where is he?" "In the old brick building by the river," she replied quickly, hope lighting in her eyes at the simple fact that he was still asking. "Third floor, room with the broken balcony rail. His name is Tomas." He repeated the name in his head, the way he had done with hers, feeling how easily it settled into the map of his awareness. Two humans, bound together by love and desperation, both now unknowingly tied to the heart of the vampire king. Elena shifted again, trying to pull away from his support. This time, she managed to stand, unsteady but upright. The red thread between them stretched but did not break, following her like a line of ghostly light. She placed a hand on the rough stone wall to steady herself, breathing hard. "I can walk," she said. "See, I'm fine, I'll get to him." "You feel fine," he corrected, standing as well, unfolding to his full, imposing height. "But you are still learning how to carry this new strength. One wrong step, one sudden shock, and your heart could try to pull more from me than it can handle, or more than I can safely give without losing control of the bond." She turned to look at him directly, the soft lamplight catching in her eyes. "What does that mean?" It meant that if her fear surged, if her desperation spiked too high, the bond could deepen on its own, pulling not just power but pieces of him, memories, instincts, feelings, until the line between their hearts blurred. It meant the risk that he, who had worked so hard to remain untouchable, might find parts of himself lodged permanently in a mortal girl who barely knew his name. "It means," he said slowly, "that you should not face the rest of this night alone." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that. She had hoped for borrowed strength, a momentary miracle, not for the nightmare king of the city to offer his presence, his protection. For a second, fear resurfaced, old stories echoing in her mind, stories of people who walked with monsters and never returned. But the bond did not lie. She could feel him through it now, the careful restraint, the way he held his own power back so it wouldn't overwhelm her. The quiet worry he would never put into words. The way he had stayed when walking away would have been easier. "You would come with me?" she asked, her voice a mix of wonder and disbelief. "I will ensure you reach your brother alive," he replied, tone still cool, but the words themselves warm enough to thaw something inside her. "After that," he let the sentence trail off because he truly did not know what would come after. Elena studied him silently. The rain had stopped, leaving his silver hair damp, small droplets clinging to the strands like scattered stars. His crimson eyes, so often the symbol of terror in whispered tales, held no hunger when they rested on her, only a complex mix of regret and resolve. "All right," she said finally, nodding once. "Come with me." The decision settled between them like a key turning in a long-locked door. He stepped forward, out of the alley and into the weak light of the narrow street, and for the first time in many years, the vampire king did something he had avoided at all costs. He walked openly beside a human, not as a predator, not as a shadow, but as a guardian bound by a thread of stolen soul. As they started toward the river, the city seemed to lean in around them, sensing the shift. Somewhere far off, unseen eyes watched from behind shuttered windows and cracked doorways. Rumors would spread. Questions would rise. Powers that preferred him distant and cold would not be pleased to see their king walking into the heart of human suffering. Elena, unaware of all the unseen attention, focused on putting one foot in front of the other, surprised every time her body obeyed with new strength. Each step sent a faint echo through the bond, like two heartbeats learning how to move in rhythm. She clutched her arms around herself, more out of habit than weakness now, and glanced up at the towering figure next to her. "What should I call you?" she asked suddenly. "I can't just shout Vampire King in the street." He hesitated. No one had used his given name in a very long time. He had buried it with the boy he once was, under layers of titles and fear. But tonight, it seemed, old things were waking. "Adrian," he said at last, the syllables soft and unfamiliar on his tongue. "My name is Adrian." Elena repeated it under her breath, testing the shape of it. "Adrian," she said, a small, unexpected smile touching her lips. "Thank you for not letting me die in that alley." The gratitude that flowed through the bond in that moment was so pure, so unguarded, that it caught him off balance. For just a heartbeat, the ancient, tired weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. He looked ahead toward the distant river, where the outline of the old brick building would soon come into view. Somewhere inside, a sick boy waited, his heart struggling alone in the dark. And as the thin red thread between Adrian and Elena glowed a little brighter in the night, the Vampire King realized that saving one life might only be the beginning. Because if Elena's brother was as close to the edge as she had been, then the question was no longer whether Adrian would risk his soul. It was whether one stolen piece would be enough. Or if this fragile girl and her dying brother were about to pull him into a choice that could change the fate of his entire immortal existence. Sometimes the most important journeys don't feel heroic while they're happening. They feel like a series of shaky steps, a racing heartbeat, and the quiet terror that you might be too late. That was how Elena felt as she and Adrian walked through the sleeping city, bound together by a thin red line of impossible magic. The streets had grown quieter with every block. Lanterns burned low, shutters were half closed, and the world seemed to hold its breath as they passed. Elena's footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestones, steadier than they had any right to be. Every time her balance wavered, a subtle warmth pulsed through the bond, catching her before she truly stumbled. She knew that was him, even when he said nothing, Adrian adjusting, feeding just a little more strength into her when she needed it. "You should not lean so heavily on the bond," he murmured as they turned into a narrower lane, its walls leaning inward like listening shoulders. "Your heart must remember how to stand on its own, or it will depend on me too completely." "And what happens if it does?" she asked, glancing sideways at him. His gaze stayed forward, but she felt the flicker of unease through the connection before he answered. "Then if anything happens to me," he said quietly, "you will not survive it." The idea of something happening to him had not fully crossed her mind until that moment. He walked beside her like carved stone come to life, tall, unshakable, wrapped in a presence that bent the shadows around him. In all the whispered stories of the Vampire King, he was unkillable, untouchable, a fixed point in the city's dark sky. "You can be hurt," she asked, surprise softening her voice. "I am not a god, Elena," he replied, a faint edge of dry humor under the words. "Just difficult to remove." His eyes slid to her, a brief, almost teasing glance. "Unlike humans who seem determined to throw themselves off the edge of the world for the sake of those they love." "For Tomas," she corrected gently. "Not for everyone, just him." He nodded once, accepting the correction, and they fell into silence again. As they neared the river, The air cooled further, carrying the scent of damp stone, iron, and distant wood smoke. The occasional clatter of carriage wheels faded behind them. Ahead, the silhouette of the old brick building slowly emerged from the darkness. Tall, tired, its windows like half-open eyes staring toward the water. Alina's chest tightened at the sight. This was home, yet tonight it looked more like a test she might fail. Her steps quickened instinctively, and immediately the bond flared, her heart stumbling as she pushed herself harder, his power rushing in to steady it. Adrian lifted a hand in a subtle gesture, not touching her, but somehow it made her slow anyway. "Careful," he warned. "Your emotions feed the bond as much as your body does. Fear, panic, they tug at it more sharply. You must learn to breathe through them." She exhaled shakily, forcing her pace to even out. "That's hard to do when I don't know if he's still." Her voice broke before she could finish. The thought she refused to say out loud pressed hot behind her eyes. He didn't interrupt with hollow reassurances. Instead, through the bond, he let a wave of calm roll gently toward her. It wasn't forced or overpowering. It was like standing near a quiet river after a storm. Solid, unmoving, steady. "Feel this instead," he said softly. "Borrow my stillness until you find your own." She closed her eyes for half a second, letting that unexpected peace anchor her. Somewhere inside the ancient creature beside her was a pool of silence that had nothing to do with emptiness. It was discipline, control, centuries of learning how not to drown in his own power. For the first time, she understood how lonely that must have been. "Thank you," she whispered. They reached the building's entrance, a warped wooden door with flaking blue paint. Alina's hand hovered over the handle, fingers trembling. The last time she had left, Tomas had been barely conscious, his breaths thin and ragged. She had kissed his forehead, promised to come back with help, and walked out wondering if she was saying goodbye. Now, she stood here with a monster at her side, and her heart beating in time with something that wasn't entirely her own anymore. "What if he's gone?" she breathed, the question finally forcing itself out. "What if I was too late anyway?" Adrian could have told her there was always hope. He could have spoken in easy comforts. Instead, he answered with a different kind of kindness, one rooted in honesty. "Then you will not have failed him," he said quietly. "You ran on a breaking heart for his sake. You crossed half the city alone. You tied yourself to a creature every story told you to fear. Love that fierce is never a failure, even if it arrives at the edge of loss." His words sank deep, not as a cure for her fear, but as a hand offered while she faced it. She drew in a steadying breath, turned the handle, and pushed the door open. The stairwell beyond was dim, lit only by a single candle left on a windowsill halfway up. The familiar creak of wood under her feet felt both comforting and terrifying. As they climbed, sounds filtered down from the upper floors, a baby's soft crying, the clink of dishes, a muffled cough. Life, stubborn and ordinary, pushing on in the dark. On the second-floor landing, an old woman in a threadbare shawl peered out of her doorway as Alina and Adrian passed. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, a tall stranger with unnatural stillness and eyes that glimmered faintly red in the low light. She froze, hand tightening on the frame. Adrian's gaze flicked to her for the briefest moment. He didn't hiss or bare fangs or draw on fear the way the legend said he did. He simply inclined his head in a small, respectful nod, a silent "I will not harm you." The woman flinched, then, to Alina's astonishment, nodded back, pressing a trembling hand to a charm at her throat. "You know they fear you," Alina murmured under her breath as they moved on. "They should," he replied calmly. "But fear does not oblige me to behave like the monster they imagine." Alina looked at him, really looked, and felt a surge of quiet respect. Kindness from someone safe was gentle. Kindness from someone feared, that was a choice, a powerful one. On the third floor, her heart lurched. The red thread between them snapped tight as her anxiety spiked, tugging on the bond. Adrian steadied her with a light touch to her elbow, not to control her, but to remind her she wasn't alone. The door to her apartment was closed, a faint line of light showing at the bottom. She fumbled with the key, hands clumsy with nerves. Before she could fit it into the lock, the door jerked open from the inside. A neighbor, Marta, stood there, thin, sleep-rumpled, worry carved into every line of her face. "Alina," she hissed in a harsh whisper. "Where have you?" Her gaze jumped past Alina to Adrian, and the color drained from her cheeks. Her hand flew to her mouth, then to the small silver cross at her throat. "Don't scream," Alina said quickly, stepping between them. "Please, he's with me." Marta stared as if Alina had just announced she'd brought a thunderstorm into the kitchen. "With you," she choked. "Alina, that's—" "He saved my life," Alina interrupted, voice firm even as fear tugged at her insides. "And I need him to save Tomas." Marta's eyes darted between them, mind racing through every story she'd ever heard. Adrian said nothing, letting Alina stand as the shield between him and the woman's terror. He could have altered Marta's memory with a look. Instead, he waited, giving her the dignity of choosing what to believe. After a long, trembling moment, Marta stepped aside. "He's worse," she whispered, eyes shining. "I didn't think you'd make it back in time." She pressed a shaking hand to Alina's arm. "Go, child, he keeps asking for you." Alina swallowed hard and hurried inside, the familiar small space rushing up to meet her. The apartment smelled of boiled herbs, damp blankets, and the faint sweetness of the chamomile tea she always made for Tomas at night. On the far side of the single room, near the cracked balcony doors, a narrow bed sat tucked against the wall. Tomas lay on it, turned slightly to one side. He looked even smaller than she remembered from that morning, his dark hair damp with sweat, lashes shadowing pale cheeks. His chest rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. One hand clutched the frayed edge of a thin blanket as if afraid even that might be taken away. Alina's vision blurred. "Tomas," she breathed, crossing the room in 3 quick steps. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice. For a moment, confusion clouded his face. Then recognition sparked, and a weak, tired smile tugged at his lips. "Lena," he whispered, "you came back." "Of course I came back," she said, dropping to her knees beside the bed and taking his cold hand in both of hers. Her voice broke on the words. "I promised, did I?" He tried to chuckle, but it dissolved into a small cough. "You always keep your promises, even the stupid ones." Behind Alina, near the doorway, Adrian stood like a shadow carved into the room, silent, watchful. Marta hovered in the corner, eyes wide, clutching a dishcloth like a shield. The air felt heavier here, not with magic, but with the weight of waiting for doctors to give up, for breaths to stop, for the last goodbye. Alina brushed damp hair from Tomas's forehead, her thumbs shaking. "I found someone," she said softly. "Someone who can help." Tomas's gaze flicked past her, landing on the tall, pale figure in the doorway. For a second, fear flickered in his eyes. He had heard the same stories everyone else had, but he was too tired to panic, too worn down to do anything but look and try to understand. "That's him," he murmured. "The one people talk about." "Yes," Alina whispered. "That's Adrian." The name hung in the air like something fragile. It felt strange, saying it out loud in this small, worn room, as if she had invited a piece of an old legend to sit at Tomas's bedside. Tomas's fingers tightened weakly around hers. "You brought a monster," he said, but there was no accusation in it, just wonder. "For me." "For you," she answered, tears spilling over now. "Because I love you, because I won't lose you without fighting with everything I have." Adrian felt those words strike him through the bond, stirring something deep and unsteady. He had been called many things, devil, shadow, nightmare, but never like this, as an act of love. He stepped closer, the floorboards barely creaking under his feet. Marta flinched but didn't move to block him. Instead, she muttered a hurried prayer under her breath and watched with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Adrian stopped at the foot of the bed, eyes traveling over the boy's frail form. He didn't need a stethoscope or a doctor's training to know how close Tomas was to the edge. The boy's pulse fluttered like a trapped bird, and his soul flickered faintly, as if it were already half-turned toward some distant, peaceful place. Elena looked up at Adrian, her hand never leaving Tomas's. "Can you help him?" she asked, no politeness, no hesitance, just raw need. "Please, I don't care what it costs me, just don't let him die." The bond between them pulsed, filled with her desperation. It tugged hard at him, pulling him closer not just to her, but to the choice she was asking him to make. He had come here to ensure her survival. That was already more involvement than he had planned. Now she was asking for something bigger, riskier, more dangerous than anything he'd allowed himself to consider in centuries. Saving Tomas would not be like stabilizing Elena with a stray, instinctive bond. The boy's heart was almost gone. To pull him back would require more than a thread of power. It would require an anchor, a second bond, another piece of what he had so carefully guarded. He looked from Tomas's pale face to Elena's tear-bright eyes. Through the connection, he felt her fear, and beneath it, a quiet, devastating readiness. She would give anything. She would gladly break herself twice over if it meant her brother could stand up again. "Think carefully about what you're asking," Adrian said, his voice low but steady. "The ritual that began between us was born of desperation, not control. I can shape it now. I can extend it. But each bond takes something from me that I do not get back." "I don't understand all of this," Elena admitted, wiping her cheeks with the back of her free hand. "I just know he's my family, and you—" Her gaze searched his face. "You didn't have to come, you didn't have to stay, but you did. So either I trust you now completely or I lose him while I hesitate." Marta, unable to stay silent any longer, stepped forward, voice shaking. "Sir, my lord, whatever you are," she stammered, "is there not some other way? A medicine, a smaller magic? The boy," she swallowed hard. "He is good. He doesn't deserve this." Adrian met her eyes, and for a brief moment, he let her see the full weight of his age, the centuries of choices like this, of lives he could have touched and didn't. "Goodness rarely earns mercy from the world," he said quietly, "but it still matters." He turned back to Elena and Tomas, the siblings clinging to each other in the dim light, two fragile threads tied together by love and stubbornness. Kindness, courage, humility, resilience. All the things he had learned to keep at a distance were standing in front of him now, asking him to step closer. "If I do this," he said slowly, "Tomas's life will be bound to mine, as yours is. Your hearts will draw from the same well of power. You both will carry a trace of my soul. You will feel one another more deeply. Share more than you ever intended to share. There will be no going back." Elena's hand tightened on Tomas's. "Will he live?" she asked simply. "If I give enough," Adrian replied, "yes." A heavy silence followed. The candle on the windowsill flickered, its flames struggling against a faint draft. Somewhere outside, the distant sound of the river whispered against the stone embankments, a quiet reminder that time was flowing on whether they chose or not. Tomas turned his head slowly, eyes finding Adrian's. There was fear there, but also something else, a strange courage that mirrored his sister S. "Why would you do this?" he asked, voice thin but clear. "For us, you don't even know us." Adrian held the boy's gaze. Through the bond with Elena, he felt the echo of Tomas in her heart, the way she saw him, the memories they shared. Childhood laughter, shared bread, long nights whispering about the future when the world felt too heavy. He had been the one bright thread in her darkest moments. "I am," Adrian said carefully, "very tired of watching good people die simply because no one with power chose to care." The confession settled in the small room with surprising gentleness. Alina's lips trembled. "Then care for him," she whispered. "Please." Something inside Adrian that had been cold for years finally cracked, not with noise, but with a quiet decision. He moved to the side of the bed opposite Alina and sat down carefully, the old frame creaking under the unfamiliar weight of his presence. He held out his hand toward Tomas, palm up, waiting. Tomas looked at his sister. Her eyes were shining but firm. She nodded once. With a slow, shaking breath, the boy placed his frail hand in Adrian's. The vampire king closed his fingers around it, surprisingly gentle. At the point of contact, the bond between Adrian and Alina flared, as if sensing what was about to happen. A faint red light shimmered around their intertwined hands, subtle at first, then slowly growing brighter. "Alina," Adrian said softly, without looking away from Tomas, "you must understand. What we are about to do, it will deepen your bond to me as well. Two hearts tied to one source. If at any point you wish me to stop, say so now." She shook her head instantly. "Don't stop, not for me." Tomas, with effort, turned his hand slightly, reaching for Alina's fingers. She took it, and now all three of them were connected. Tomas's hand in Adrian's, Alina's wrapped around her brother S. The red thread between Alina and Adrian pulsed, brightening, sensing a new path to travel. "You both must trust me," Adrian said quietly. "And more importantly, you must trust each other. This will not work if either of you pulls away in fear." Alina met Tomas's gaze, eyes wet but determined. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Me neither," he whispered back, though his voice shook. Adrian inhaled slowly, ancient reflexes stirring. Power coiled inside him, deep and vast, like a storm waking from a long sleep. He hadn't used this kind of magic in centuries for a reason. It was intimate, exposing, irreversible. He began to speak words no human tongue had shaped in generations, low, melodic syllables that seemed to slip under the skin of the world itself. The candlelight flickered in response, shadows lengthening along the walls. The air grew warmer, humming with a soft vibration that made fine cracks in the plaster glow faintly. The red light around their hands brightened, then extended, a second thread forming and reaching from Adrian's chest toward Tomas's. The boy gasped as it touched him, not in pain, but in shock, as if the cold he had been living in for months had suddenly been met by a rising warmth. Alina felt it too through the bond, Adrian opening himself wider, letting more of his power flow out. It was like standing at the edge of a vast, ancient sea, feeling the tide begin to surge toward shore. "Adrian," she whispered, a note of concern threading through her awe. "How much are you?" He didn't answer, too focused now. His eyes, half-lidded, glowed faintly with a deeper crimson. The second red thread thickened, pulsing in time with Tomas's faltering heart. Each time the boy's pulse stumbled, the magic caught it, lifted it, coaxed it back into rhythm. But Alina felt something else, too, something that made her breath hitch. Every pulse that went into Tomas seemed to take not just power from Adrian, but weight. Fragments of old sorrow, faint traces of fear he had never allowed himself to voice. Memories that tasted of loss and betrayal and lonely centuries spent in ruins and shadows. They flowed out of him in tiny measures, too subtle for anyone else to notice. Except her. Through their shared bond, Alina caught glimpses of him she was never meant to see. A younger Adrian, human and laughing. A battlefield drenched not in blood, but in the piercing sound of goodbye. A promise he had broken once long ago that had taught him to never make another. The pain tucked behind his still face wasn't monstrous at all. It was deeply, terribly human. Her throat tightened with unexpected compassion. "You're giving more than power," she whispered, realization threading through her voice. His jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't stop. "That is the nature of soul binding," he managed. Some of what wounds me will no longer be only mine to carry. Tomas's breathing eased, growing deeper, more even. Color began to creep back into his cheeks, the blue from his lips draining away. The red thread connecting them glowed brighter still, now joined by faint, delicate strands that reached sideways, from Tomas toward Alina, from Alina back to Adrian, forming a fragile, shimmering triangle of shared life. Marta, in the corner, sank slowly to her knees, whispering prayers she no longer knew how to shape. The room felt almost sacred, not because of any altar, but because of the quiet, ordinary love being fused to something extraordinary. Alina's heart swelled with gratitude so strong it made her dizzy. She tightened her grip on both their hands, tears falling freely now. "Adrian," she said, voice trembling, "thank you. Whatever happens next, thank you." The words wrapped around him through the bond like a gentle cloak, warm and undeserved. And for a heartbeat, he nearly faltered, not from exhaustion, but from the unfamiliar ache of being thanked not as a ruler, not as a threat averted, but simply as a person who chose to be kind. The final phrase of the ancient ritual formed on his tongue, heavy with power. If he spoke it, the bond would seal. Tomas would live, but the connection between the three of them would become permanent, a web that nothing, not time, not distance, could easily undo. He hovered on the edge of that last word, feeling the weight of choice press in. And in that split-second pause, just as Tomas's heart found a stronger rhythm, just as Alina's gratitude flooded the bond, a new sensation pierced through the magic like a shard of ice. A presence. Cold, sharp, and watching. Somewhere not far from the building, just outside the reach of ordinary senses, something old and dark brushed against the edges of Adrian's power. It felt the bond, tasted the change, and focused in on it with predatory interest. Adrian's head snapped up, crimson eyes cutting toward the window, even as the glowing threads between them pulsed with unfinished energy. Someone, or something, had just noticed that the Vampire King had done the one thing his enemies had always believed he would never do. He had given his soul a place to be stolen. And with the final word of the ritual still unspoken, hanging on his tongue like the end of a drawn arrow, Adrian realized with a jolt that sealing this bond might not only save one boy's life. It might also paint a glowing target on the hearts of the only two humans he had ever chosen to protect. Some endings don't arrive with silence. They arrive with a choice so heavy that every breath feels like it might break under it. That was how it felt for Adrian, Vampire King, silent guardian, lonely monster, as he knelt at Tomas's bedside with a half-finished spell burning on his tongue, and the cold touch of another presence sliding along the edge of his power. He did not move his hands. Tomas's frail fingers still rested in his, Alina's grip still anchored them all together. The red threads of magic glowed between their chests, trembling with unspent energy. But Adrian's eyes shifted to the cracked balcony doors, his mind reaching out past stone and glass into the night. Something was there. It felt like frost creeping over old wounds, familiar and unwelcome. A magic that tasted similar to his own but twisted sideways, hungrier, crueler, refined over centuries of resentment. He knew this flavor of power. He had once called it brother. "Alina," he said quietly, his voice so calm it almost hid the steel underneath. "Do not let go of Tomas's hand, no matter what you see, no matter what you feel." Her fingers tightened instinctively. "What's wrong?" she whispered, glancing at his face, then toward the balcony. "What do you sense?" Adrian didn't answer with words. Instead, he stood in one fluid motion, still holding Tomas's hand, still connected by that fragile triangle of light. He faced the cracked doors, the wind outside pressing against them with a soft, uncertain rattle. Marta, still kneeling in the corner, crossed herself again and again. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, "no more devils tonight." A faint knock echoed from the glass. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Alina's heart jumped violently, tugging on the bond. Adrian sent her another wave of calm through it, gentler this time, like a hand resting reassuringly against her back. "You are not in danger," he murmured, eyes fixed on the balcony. "Not while I stand here, remember that." But he knew the truth was more complicated. They were in danger, just not the kind that could be solved with claws or fangs. This was a danger of hearts and promises and old debts. The balcony door, latched only by a weakened hook, swung inward with a sigh of protesting hinges. Cold night air flowed into the room, carrying the damp scent of the river and something else. A figure stepped through the opening as if it were the entryway to a grand hall, not a cramped home at the edge of the city. He looked like a reflection of Adrian glimpsed in shattered glass. Pale, elegant, dark hair slicked back like polished ink, eyes the same unnatural crimson. But where Adrian's gaze held depth and sorrow, this new arrival's shone with amusement and sharp, cutting interest. His clothes were too fine for this place. A long coat of midnight velvet, boots that never seemed to collect dust, a silver ring glimmering on one gloved hand. "Older brother," the newcomer said smoothly, voice rich with mock sweetness. "You never invite me anywhere anymore. Imagine my surprise when I felt your power flare like a beacon over half the city." Adrian's jaw tightened. Lazarus. Alina stiffened at the name, instinctively leaning closer to Tomas. Through the bond, she felt Adrian's emotions twist, old anger, older guilt, and something like grief buried deep. "Lazarus," she echoed softly. He inclined his head toward her with a graceful bow, as if they were meeting at a formal ball instead of in a worn apartment that smelled of boiled herbs and worry. "At your service," he said. "Well, not really, but names are such charming things, aren't they?" His eyes flicked to the glowing threads of red light. "And what have we here? Adrian the Merciful, bending his ancient soul to save a couple of dying children. How poetic." Marta made a strangled sound and pressed herself back against the wall, whispering a prayer through trembling lips. Tomas, still weak but now breathing more easily, stared in wide-eyed fear and confusion. Adrian stepped between Lazarus and the bed, the red lines between their chests stretching but remaining unbroken. "You will not touch them," he said calmly. The quiet of his tone only made the threat heavier. "Leave now, and I will ignore this insult." Lazarus's smile widened. "Insult? I arrived to witness a miracle. You, of all creatures, giving away pieces of your soul like alms. I had to see it with my own eyes." He took another step forward, glancing past Adrian to Alina. "Tell me, little heart, did he mention what happens when a being as old as my brother begins tying himself to mortals?" Alina swallowed, but she didn't drop her gaze. "He told me the cost was his," she said, voice steady despite her fear. "Not mine, not Tomas's." "Ah," Lazarus chuckled. "Of course he did, always the noble one." His eyes sharpened. "But here is the secret he won't admit. When a creature like us binds his essence to others, he doesn't just give himself away. He becomes vulnerable, trackable. Every bond is a doorway someone like me can use." A chill ran through Alina that had nothing to do with the night air. Through the bond, she felt Adrian's tension deepen, not from surprise, but from the confirmation of something he had feared from the moment he felt Lazarus outside. "So that's why you're here," Adrian said quietly. "You finally found a way to get past my walls, through them." "Don't sound so offended," Lazarus replied lightly. "You dug the tunnel yourself. I only walked through it." He studied Tomas with a clinical detachment that made Alina's skin crawl, then turned back to Adrian. "You cannot protect them forever. Humans break. They die. And when they do, they will take those pieces of your soul with them. All that power, all that history just gone. Interesting, isn't it?" Adrian's hands curled into fists at his sides. "They are not vessels," he said, the words edged with steel. "They are people." "And that," Lazarus said gently, almost kindly, is exactly why you should not have done this. His gaze slid to Alina, resting there with unsettling focus. You can feel him, can't you? His memories, his pain, a little of his strength humming under your skin. Imagine how that could be used. Alina's heart pounded, fear rising, but beneath it, anger stirred. Not wild rage, but a firm, quiet refusal to see herself and her brother as tools. I won't let you use him, she said, surprising herself with how fiercely the words came out. Or us. Lazarus laughed softly. You won't let me? Child, I walked this earth before your great-grandmother's bones turned to dust. I have watched kingdoms rise and burn. What exactly do you think you are going to do to stop me? Before she could answer, Adrian stepped slightly to the side, placing himself more fully between Lazarus and the siblings. You will do nothing, he said, because you are going to leave. Lazarus tilted his head. And if I do? Adrian's eyes grew darker, crimson deepening toward a shade that barely looked natural anymore. Then, he said, each word quiet and precise, I will show you exactly how much of my soul I still own. The tension in the room snapped taut like a drawn bow. For a heartbeat, Alina thought they might tear the world apart right there in Tomas's tiny bedroom. She could feel the power coiled inside Adrian, old and vast, pressing against the edges of his self-control. At the same time, she felt something else, a deep, steady fear, not for himself, but for what a real clash between them would do to everyone in the room. Alina realized suddenly that if this turned into a fight, Tomas's small heart, newly reaching for life, might not survive the shock. Stop, she said sharply, the word cutting through the thickening magic. Both vampires glanced at her, surprised. If you fight here, he dies anyway. She looked straight at Lazarus. You said you came to see him give his soul away. Fine, you've seen it, now leave. Lazarus regarded her with new interest. You're braver than you look, he mused, or more foolish. His gaze flicked to the glowing threads again. Adrian, did you tell her what happens if you complete that ritual while I am standing here, watching? Every bound heart becomes a point of pressure, a way for me to push. You finish tying yourself to the boy, and I can lean on those bonds until something snaps. Alina felt Adrian's conflict surge through the connection like a rip tide. To save Tomas fully, he needed to speak that final word, to seal the magic. But sealing it now, under Lazarus's gaze, might invite more danger than it could withstand. Leave, Adrian repeated, voice low. You learned what you came to learn. I won't warn you again. Lazarus's pleasant mask slipped, just for an instant, revealing something cold and brittle beneath. You always think you can order the world into being kind, he said softly. But you are out of your depth this time, brother. You've tied yourself to the tide. These children, they will break you. He turned toward the balcony again, coat swirling around him like a shadow given form. At the threshold, he paused. I'll give you one piece of advice, because once, a very long time ago, I almost loved the person you used to be. He looked back over his shoulder, crimson eyes gleaming. Do not make promises you cannot keep, not to them, not to yourself. And then he was gone, vanishing into the night as if the darkness had simply swallowed him whole. The room exhaled. Marta collapsed back against the wall, sobbing quietly with relief. Tomas squeezed Alina's hand weakly, eyes still wide. Lena, he whispered. What was that? Alina didn't answer immediately. She was watching Adrian. He stood perfectly still, staring at the open balcony, jaw clenched so tightly she could see the tension in his neck. Through the bond, she felt the storm raging inside him. Fury at Lazarus, terror at the vulnerability he'd just exposed, and above it all, a heavy weight of responsibility pressing down like stone. Adrian, she said softly, look at me. He turned, and in that moment, the vampire king did not look like an untouchable king at all. He looked humanly unsure. You heard him, Adrian said quietly. If I seal this bond now, while he knows exactly how to find it, I put you both at risk. I give him leverage he has wanted for centuries. But if you don't, Alina replied, voice breaking, Tomas dies. The truth stood between them, merciless and clear. Tomas coughed, trying to push himself up a little. I don't want, he stopped, catching his breath. I don't want him to suffer for me, he said, looking from Alina to Adrian. You already did too much, Lena, if the cost is… It's not your decision alone, Alina interrupted, tears welling again. If you die and I live because he saved me but not you, do you understand what that would do to my heart? She shook her head fiercely. No, I won't carry that, not when there is a chance. She turned fully to Adrian, eyes shining with desperate clarity. You asked me to trust you. Now I'm asking you to trust me back. I know this puts us in danger, but if you walk away now to keep yourself safe, you'll break something in me that no magic can fix. Her words struck deeper than any accusation. Through the bond, he felt the shape of her fear, not fear of death, but of being left behind, of promises twisted into half-truths, of learning that kindness only went so far before self-protection took over. Slowly, Adrian sank back down onto the edge of the bed. He looked at Tomas, then at Alina, then at the thin, trembling threads of light between them all. For centuries, he said quietly, I have survived by never giving anyone the power to hurt me. His gaze caught Alina's, and in it she saw the boy he once had been, standing alone on some forgotten battlefield. Tonight I did, not once but twice. And you are right, I cannot step back now and pretend I didn't begin this. He lifted Tomas's hand again, lightly, as if it were made of glass. There will be consequences, he warned. For you, Alina, for Tomas, for me. Alina nodded, tears slipping free. Then we faced them together. Tomas swallowed hard. Are you sure? He whispered. She smiled at him through her tears, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. I have never been more sure of anything. Adrian looked at the two of them, at the way they held on to each other even at the edge of everything. Kindness, courage, humility, resilience. All the things he had tried to live without were right here in front of him, asking not for his power, but for his partnership. He closed his eyes. This time, he said, barely above a whisper, I will not run from the price. And then, with a steady, deliberate breath, he spoke the final ancient word. The reaction was immediate. The red threads between them blazed with sudden, brilliant light, flooding the room in a soft crimson glow. Marta shielded her eyes, gasping. The candle's flame bowed low, almost extinguished by the rush of magic, then flared back even stronger. The air vibrated like the moment before a bell tolls. Tomas arched slightly, not in pain, but in shock, as warmth poured into his chest. Alina felt it too, waves of energy moving through her, not burning but lifting, as if invisible weights were being stripped from her ribs. At the center of it all, Adrian's presence flooded the bond. Ancient, immense, but oddly gentle, careful not to crush them under the sheer depth of what he was. Memories rippled at the edges of Alina's mind, not clear images, but impressions. A boy standing in a field of long grass under a sky full of real stars. Laughter around a fire. A hand letting go when it should have held tighter. A decision made in anger that had echoed for generations. Pain. Regret. And beneath it all, an unbroken, stubborn refusal to stop hoping that one day he might do something truly good again. As the light slowly dimmed, settling back into thin, quiet threads, Alina realized something else. She could feel Tomas more clearly now, too. His relief, his confusion, his fragile hope fluttering like a bird just freed from its cage. She opened her eyes. Tomas lay still, chest rising and falling in a strong, steady rhythm that had been missing for months. The blue tinge was gone from his lips. His cheeks held a faint flush of color. When he looked at her, his eyes were clearer than she had seen them in a long time. Lena, he whispered, voice hoarse but solid. I can breathe, all the way, it doesn't hurt. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, pressing her forehead to his hand. You're here, she choked. You're really here. He squeezed her fingers back, this time with real strength. Adrian watched them silently, the weight of what he'd done settling over him like a cloak that was heavy and yet right. His chest felt strangely light, as if some of the oldest shadows had thinned. Yes, parts of him were now bound to these two humans. Yes, Lazarus would almost certainly try to exploit that. Yes, his own safety had just become more complicated than it had been in centuries. But for the first time in a long, long while, the balance of his existence didn't tilt entirely toward survival. It tilted toward meaning. Marta, tears streaming freely now, crawled forward and grabbed Adrian's hand, pressing frantic kisses to his knuckles before he could pull away. Bless you, she whispered. Whatever you are, bless you. I don't know your gods, but I'll pray for you anyway. He gently extricated his hand, almost embarrassed by her gratitude. Be careful what you pray for, he murmured. Sometimes the answer is not what you expect. Elena wiped her cheeks and looked up at him, eyes shining with something beyond simple thanks. Admiration, trust, emotional closeness he had not earned over time, but through a single, enormous decision. Adrian, she said softly, you did it. We did it, he corrected. The bond is not a gift I gave alone. You allowed it. You carried part of the weight. She managed a watery smile. Then we'll carry the rest together. Tomas's gaze shifted between them, confusion and curiosity meeting in his eyes. So, what happens now? He asked. Adrian exhaled slowly, a hint of humor touching his lips. Now, he said, you rest. Your heart will need time to understand that it is no longer breaking. And you, Elena asked, what will you do? He looked toward the open balcony, where the night lay waiting like an unwritten chapter. Lazarus won't give up easily, he said. He will test these bonds. He will try to frighten you, perhaps even offer you power in exchange for turning against me. He met her gaze. When that happens, remember this night not the magic, but the choice behind it. I did not bind myself to you as a king claiming property. His eyes softened. I bound myself as someone who wanted you to live. Through the shared connection, Elena felt the raw honesty of that confession. No manipulation, no hidden agenda, just a simple, profound truth. We won't betray you, she said quietly. Not Tomas, not me. Tomas nodded, still pale but fiercely serious. Anyone who saves my sister, he said, is someone I stand with, even if he's a terrifying vampire king. A surprised, genuine laugh slipped from Adrian's lips, short, rough, but real. It felt strange in his mouth, like a language he hadn't spoken in far too long. Terrifying him, he echoed. A little, Tomas admitted, but also kind. Adrian fell silent at that, the word echoing in places inside him he had once thought permanently numb. Kind. Not feared, not worshipped, not obeyed. Kind. He rose to his feet, cloak brushing softly against the worn floor. The thin red threads between his chest and theirs shimmered faintly, then settled into a steady, almost invisible glow, present, but no longer demanding attention. I will not stay, he said. Your lives are yours, not mine to hover over, but I will watch from a distance. If you ever feel the bond flare suddenly as it did tonight, it will mean I am calling to you, warning you, or coming. Elena stood too, swaying only slightly before finding her balance. She stepped forward, hesitation written in every line of her body, then did something she hadn't planned or practiced. She reached out and gently, carefully, wrapped her arms around him. For a heartbeat, Adrian went completely still. He hadn't been embraced like this, a simple, human gesture of gratitude and affection, in longer than he could clearly remember. At first, his instinct was to pull back, to protect the last inches of space he still claimed as his own. But the bond carried her intentions straight into him. No manipulation, no fear. Just thank you and you're not alone, and please don't disappear forever, all tangled together. Slowly, awkwardly, he brought one arm up and rested his hand lightly between her shoulder blades. You are brave, Alina, he said softly. Do not let anyone, not even me, convince you otherwise. She pulled back, eyes glistening. You're braver, she replied. You had more to lose. He didn't argue. With one last look at Tomas, now lying back against his pillow, breathing in deep, astonished lungfuls of air, Adrian stepped toward the balcony. Marta moved aside, bowing her head. Alina and Tomas watched, silent, as he paused at the threshold. He glanced back over his shoulder. Live well, he said. Make this cost worth its price. We will, Alina promised. We'll make you proud, Tomas added, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Something in Adrian's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Then he stepped into the night, and with a blur of shadow and silver hair, he was gone upward into the darkness, toward the ruined cathedral that had been his fortress of solitude for so long. Only now, it no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a place to think, to plan, to protect. He landed on the familiar stone ledge, wind tugging at his cloak. Below, the city pulsed with thousands of heartbeats, each one a tiny story. Two of those beats now thrummed in quiet harmony with his own. Alina's, steady and strong. Tomas's, still fragile but no longer fading. Lazarus's warning lingered in his mind like an echo. These children, they will break you. Adrian stared out over the rooftops, feeling the new bonds hum gently in his chest. Maybe, he murmured to the empty air, or maybe they are the only thing that will finally make me whole. For the first time in centuries, the endless night did not feel so bleak. Down by the river, in a small brick building with a cracked balcony, a brother and sister fell asleep holding each other's hands, their hearts beating to a rhythm no longer ruled by fear. They did not know what trials would come next. They did not know how often the shadow of a velvet-cloaked figure would watch their window from afar, making sure danger did not slip too close. They only knew this. When the world had been ready to let go of them, someone who called himself a monster had chosen, instead, to hold on. And somewhere deep inside that so-called monster, in a place that had been locked away for too long, something quiet and miraculous stirred. Hope, not for eternity, not for power, but for a different kind of immortality. The kind that lived on in the lives he had changed, in the hearts that now carried small, bright pieces of his once guarded soul. The Vampire King had saved her life. She had accidentally stolen his soul. And together, without meaning to, they had given each other something far more terrifying and precious than either had bargained for. A reason to be better tomorrow than they had been today.